Welcome everyone to my most recent podcast episode that you can also watch here on YouTube. I have waited a really long time to be able to finally do this episode, and it had something to do with my own personal journey, and it's related and linked to my recent travels to Portugal, to southern France in general, but also Jerusalem, Jordan, and finding the story of the Essenes, people who lived in a very simple and simplified way of life, and they lived by something called the way, and it was really about finding the true connection to your soul, and understanding how in a body vessel, how that is manifested in this form. And I'm not going to take away too much from the interview, but my interview is Freddy Silva. He has many titles, so I hope this does him justice. He is an author of the books on the Templars. He has also, I would call him a historian, because he has really gone really deep in a lot of texts, and texts that are very old, from the way back, the Alexandrian library probably, and scrolls, etc., everything you can find on this metaphysical yet esoteric, and the mysteries of Jesus, Magdalene, the Templars, but also the megalithic stones, the corn circles, why they appear, why is the Stonehenge the way it is, what can we draw from it. It's just a magnitude of things. He's also taken groups into Portugal, but also Egypt. He deciphers really for us with modern tools such as science and barometers to really read the energy, and how we can transcend our bodily human form and be in touch with, some call it the supernatural, but I find it's really ourselves. It's really a higher aspect of ourselves. And I also believe that we are guided to do these things, and that's my personal journey. So without further ado, this is the interview I did with him very recently, just after Easter, which is timely because he speaks a lot about the resurrection ceremony, what it really was, what Mary Magdalene really was. He talks about this history of Portugal. He also speaks of the Templars and so many other things. Below you can see the timings for the different topics. I highly recommend to watch the whole thing, and also to check out his work. There are several YouTube podcasts and clips such as this. He's also working on a documentary on Egypt, and then he's written many books on he mentions some of them in the clip, but on the Templars, on Portugal, on Mary Magdalene and Jesus, but also your soul's blueprint, your connection to the unseen, the ley lines, etc. So it's my pleasure to share this with you. This is really a deep interest of mine that I have not really been public about, but I have spent a lot of time traveling without understanding why I want to go to certain places, and it's been after, when I dig into history, that I really understand why and what's happening with me as I'm at these places, and also the deep connection I have to France. I moved there when I was 15. I learned French, and I've spent a huge amount of time in that country. And also the connection to the sacred land, and sacred land sites, you know. And also, I will say I'm passionate about turning around the misinformation that we have received from books and the Inquisition and the Church. So I really, really hope that you will enjoy this interview as much as I did. And let me know how you feel in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. The links for me with the Templars in Portugal. And I just see the links between like that he made through Egypt and then the Gnostic Gospels and, you know, these scenes and Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
And then what I feel is I just feel to follow the thread of the Magdalenes for some reason, not feeling like I'm, you know, I'm in need of doing anything in particular. I'm really drawn to these areas.
Yeah.
And I feel these areas activate me in some way, but I'd love to actually hear. I mean, there's so many things I'd love to hear, but there are just these pressing things that I can't seem to figure out. And it is why what did the Templars have to do, like really with this Gnostic gospel, the Magdalenes? I can't seem to make that link. And then I can't seem to understand where the Templars and the more recent history and these secret societies kind of went quite dark, because they don't seem
Yes and no.
very
Yes
light
and no.
to me.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's
you
the
gotta
two
don't
caps
believe
I have.
everything you read, and don't
Right.
believe everything on the internet. There's a lot of nonsense out there. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, to cut a very long story short, because I published all of that in First Templar Nation, the idea was that the Templars were really following a very old tradition, which goes back to the Essenes, and they maintained this connection for 1,000 years through the royal houses of Europe, and they kept it kind of quiet because the church was basically very dominant. So they found the right moment in time when the Crusades were going to Jerusalem, and they went on the back of the Crusades to go and find something that had been hidden there. The clue really lies in what built. If you look at all the churches, not one of them is ever dedicated to Jesus. They didn't care about Jesus. They respected him as an individual, but then what he had done had been done by thousands of other people before him for thousands of years. So he wasn't special. They dedicated all their churches to Mary Magdalene and John the Baptist. So you have to find out what's important about them and track their lineage back to about 3,500, 4,000 BC in Sumeria. And now you're making the connection because that links the Essenes, the Mandeans, the Manichaeans, all the other Ians together. And when you see that they share something in common, that gets you into a much more close understanding of what the Templars were doing. So essentially, if you go back to Japan in 8,000 BC, there was a group of gods that appeared out of nowhere from a sinking continent in the middle of the Pacific after a global flood. And they arrived in Japan with some teachings, and there are 17 teachings, and they are called the Way of the Gods. Now, this way, which we call today the Tao, or the Tao, eventually moves through India, it moves through Sumeria, it ends up in the Near East around the time of the Gnostic Christians, the early Christian people, long before Jesus was even around. And they picked up these teachings. They call it the Way, which is exactly what it means in translation. And they were practicing this mystical experience where you have an out-of-body experience involving a near-death experience. It's very dangerous. And then from that experience, you are declared risen from the dead. That's what the term means. You are awakened. You are enlightened. No one ever died. No one ever got nailed to a cross. That's where fundamentalist Christianity went. So this went underground during the Catholic era when they were trying to basically undermine these sort of esoteric teachings that everybody was practicing to give the illusion that there's a God outside of yourself and you have to talk to a priest and pay them money to talk to God on your behalf. So they took the God that's inside and they made it an external event, and they put a lot of fear into anyone that wasn't practicing this because it was a cabal. They were making money out of this. Catholicism is one of the most evil religions in the planet. It does everything but connect you with this sort of things.
You just
That's what
said
early
cabal.
Christianity was doing.
You just said
It's like
cabal. You mean
It's
that?
like a cabal. Yeah, it is. It's like a mafia, essentially. They don't practice what they preach, and they have no understanding of what it is that they're preaching. And that's what the Gnostic Christians were upset about, that they stole their ideas without understanding the teachings of what they were trying to teach. So 1,000 years later, the Templars suddenly had the moment of opportunity to go back to Jerusalem to uncover all of these scrolls that the Essenes buried under Temple Mount. And they had to be decrypted. There's a paper trail that goes all the way to Belgium. And then, in order to practice this mystical experience, they created Portugal as a country because it was as far from Rome as you could get back then. It was a very safe haven. And the Portuguese have always been very autonomous people. They don't like to rule people, and they don't wish to be ruled. It's a very democratic kind of society. So they found a kindred spirit in the people that lived in Portugal at the time. And that's where they also put part of the bloodline, because Mary Magdalene was also pregnant. She had 3 children, and Lawrence Gardner picked up on this, as well as Lee, Bagehot, and Lincoln, Henry Lincoln, when they wrote the Holy Blood, Holy Grail. They found this trail of evidence. So part of that goes to France, part of it goes to Scotland, and the other one ends up in Portugal. So the reason why the Templars founded that country was to A, practice what they had learned from the scrolls left behind by the Essenes, and 2, because they were protecting a bloodline there, and 3, because they were trying to set up a utopia from which everybody could benefit in Europe. And that's why they became rich and famous in a very short space of time. They were offering spiritual salvation through your understanding of your own self, which is your own God inside, which back then was very, very shocking because the church was trying to outlaw this kind of idea. So this is why the Templars were respected and loved during that time. And then, of course, when the church finally cottoned on to what they were doing, they moved to Scotland, and then from there they went underground. They changed their name to Scottish Rite Freemasonry. So they're still around today. They just keep changing their name to survive. They call themselves the Invisible College, the White Brotherhood, Rosicrucians. It's the same people practicing the same thing, but just going under different names so the church can't find out where they are and who they are. So the system still survives today in one way or another. Where it gets a little bit dark is where you have people who want this information, but they don't have the integrity to apply it. There's a system in place that maintains the integrity of the information, and it's only given to those who have the integrity and the patience to learn it. There's not many people. So we have people who essentially created a alternative Masonic movement, which is the London Rite, which only really happened in the 18th century. They're the nasty people who are trying to take over the world, and they've got their fingers in different pies. Those are not the real Freemasons, you see. So yes, there's a bit of darkness to it, but really it's a lot of it is people who think they know what they're doing, but they really have no idea what it is they're doing. It sets up this sort of parallel universe, little of which has any resemblance to any kind of reality. So I wouldn't be worried about it because they don't really know what it is that they're up to. And even people within the Masonic movement in London, the London Rite, said that these people will think that they have some contact with the devil and the dark forces. And to be honest, they haven't. They have no idea of the things that they're doing, the practices that they're speaking of. It's just a big sort of show of force by an old boy network that tried to control the world for financial reasons. But, partly they succeed because the illusion becomes very real through places like the internet or some forms of extremist media. But as long as you don't buy into that, I wouldn't even worry about it. They're basically not going anywhere.
Interesting.
So that's the history of the world in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, that was a good one. And I remember the reference. I've also read the book Holy Grail. What was the name of Lawrence?
The Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Yeah, so I read that as well. But
very good book.
Very good book, and I'm really connecting a lot of dots because I'm not talking to them, but I'm researching from different sources, also from the people who work purely with the energetics and meditate on these sacred sites. So they get the information from the site itself, it seems, and then there's the historians such as Lawrence Gardner who who spoke a lot about blood right. I would really love, this is also a blank for me, and I'm not sure how much information you have on it, but I'd love to understand more about one. I know you have a lot of really interesting knowledge about how sacred sites work. So that's the one.
Mm.
And then the second is also Mary Magdalene, her role in these, as I understand, also like the resurrection ceremony, if you can call it that, and what the priestesses were actually doing. Because this is also, I feel, also the side of the feminine, as you know, and Lawrence Gardner also speaks of it, has really been suppressed. And that's very much my path to resurrect and reclaim the feminine and sacred in the feminine. And it's so hard to come across because there's so much, you know, they've really, really done a good job in eradicating it. I mean, we're here, so we're doing the work, but it's like you have such a, you have so much knowledge. So it just helps me so much to kind of connect those dots about Mary Magdalene, these sacred sites. What were the priestesses doing? Why did we, you know, why did we even need them? Why are they important? And this in correlation or relation to this bloodline. Was that a question?
I published that in The Lost Art of Resurrection, the book.
Right, okay.
It's all in there. And basically what was happening was that Mary Magdalene, I mean, there's so little written about her, and yet there's so many people who've written books about her, which are a million times more than it's available in terms of information. So there's a lot of personal opinion being put in here, which is very difficult to sort of sift through. But if you just base it on what we know from the original text, we do know that it wasn't a real name. Mary was the tradition that she was following. So that was the tradition of Isis. She could have been Helen, she could have been Susan. It depends which tradition you're learning. Now, her idea was to follow the tradition of the Isis tradition, which is the Marian tradition. Magdal Eder is actually a title. It's not a name, it's a title. And it means the watchtower of the flock. So it signifies that she had risen to the top of the tower, and she has now had people in charge under her. So the flock of the people. So if you're at the top of the watchtower and you have the people below you, you basically have reached the highest level of initiation of the temple. And she basically, if you look at the story in the Bible, which you really can't trust because it's so perverted, but if you strip away all the layers of nonsense and you get down to the nuts and bones of what the story says, the original, the first person who was the witness to Jesus' miraculous resurrection, which again is completely misconstrued in the Bible. It was Mary Magdalene, not Peter. Okay, Mary Magdalene was the original witness to his miraculous rebirth. Why? Because he had been drugged before he was tied to a cross, and it was a ritual cross. It wasn't nailed to a cross. He was tied to it, and there's another story behind that. So he actually didn't get nailed to anything. He was taken down sometime later, and the first person that's there to revive him, to give him the antidote to the poison, is Mary Magdalene. Now, only a woman who has the highest level of initiation in the temple has access to the understanding of poisons and antidotes, okay? And if you follow those bits of information all the way through the Middle East, they end up in Sumeria with the tradition of the Sumerians, who were practicing exactly the same thing. So the women had the highest level of clearance because, one, they carried the bloodline. That was the most important thing. The other person that carried the importance of the temple tradition was the priest Messiah, who was John the Baptist. He follows that tradition because he is like the PR of the temple. But Mary Magdalene and all the women that came before her were the people who also held the importance of the temple in equal balance with the priest Messiah. But she was more important because she holds the bloodline, and the bloodline is what maintains the tradition of the temple. So if you go back to Sumeria, the women were involved in the most secret rite, which is the rite of initiation. And this is after 3 years when the initiate has learned all the teachings. They're about to put it into practice, and this is where you do the very, very dangerous thing. It's a 9-month process. It starts at Easter and it ends in the winter solstice. So the church has got the resurrection backwards, by the way. The resurrection is on the winter solstice because that's when the sun comes back to renew the earth. It overcomes the dark. That's the metaphor. So they are drugged. The initiate is drugged with a poison, and they have an induced near-death experience. They're put inside a box or a chamber or a cave, and then for 3 days they've left the body. They've gone AWOL into the other world, and they come back into the body. And while this is happening, the women are singing around the body, like they sound like bees. They sound like a hum, and the idea was that you're protecting the body, the vessel of the initiate, while the soul has left, to make sure that no other soul can enter the body. You see, you want to maintain that vessel so that the person has somewhere to come back to.
Yeah.
And because they sounded, they were humming for 3 days, they sounded like bees. So the nickname stuck. They were called the bees. So if you look at all the gods in mythology, like Zeus, for example, they are taken away from their mother's breast to feed, so that they're not fed milk from the breast. They are given to a midwife who gives them honey, and the honey gives them insight and knowledge, the knowledge of the gods. So when you have women called Melissa or Melita, it's called honey. They're the women who administered the honey, and the honey is a metaphor for the knowledge that drips down from the sky as the knowledge of the gods. So when you look at Egypt, for example, you look at the solar disk, and Ra is crying tears of honey that comes down to the people that are receiving it. You see it in many temple walls. So whenever you see the reference between women and honey, that tells you that the woman has a high level of clearance. So they held the most important thing. Now, the Catholic Church couldn't have that because they wanted a guy to be the patron of the foundation of the Catholic Church. So they make Peter the first witness to Jesus' miraculous resurrection, because apparently he was the first bishop of Rome. Peter was never, ever the first bishop of Rome. It's a complete lie. There is not one shred of evidence to back that up. So they've made up this whole story in order to take the women out of the equation, because they knew that Mary Magdalene was pregnant. They knew that she was carrying the bloodline. So she has to go underground and protect that bloodline. And it's still around. Lincoln Lee and Bajent actually alluded to this, and Dan Brown, obviously, who copied the book into his film, The Da Vinci Code, alluded to the fact that the people are still alive today that carry that bloodline. Now, how pure it is, we don't know, because there's been so much intermarriage. The idea was that you kept the bloodline pure to maintain the integrity of the blood itself, because their special ability of these people was in the blood. They could see without traveling. They were great clairvoyants and great healers, but that ability is not learned. It's actually in the blood itself. That's why intermarriage is very, very important. You didn't want to marry with normal people because it dilutes your ability. So that was the big story behind Mary Magdalene. She's part of a very old tradition.
Do you know anything about the people who are part of this bloodline?
Oh, I don't know. Someone said that I'm part of the bloodline. I mean, good God. Although there are people in the Masonic order. I mean, I think all of us want to be someone special, I think, in life. I don't really give it much attention.
In our own way.
You know, what I mean? It's like, oh, I used to be a god or a king or a queen.
Sure.
But no, there are people within the Masonic world that have actually been following my work with the Templars in Portugal, because I was asking these very awkward questions. And it turns out, and I had no idea this was even going on, that my family can be traced to the first family of Portugal, and they are related somehow to the first ruler of Portugal, and also to Bernard of Clairvaux, who was part of the divine bloodline. And I don't look Portuguese. I really don't. I'm a 6'5".
I mean, I don't think it's a, you know, we follow our destiny, don't we? You know, you're uncovering.
I'm beginning to suspect something's going on, you know. Wow. So I guess I'm part of royalty. Who knew? But I'm very tall. I'm very unusual for someone who's born in Portugal. I mean, I have green eyes. I was blonde when I was young.
Your family comes from there, or parts of your family?
I was born in Portugal. Yeah, my family's all Portuguese. So and also my DNA, 38 of my DNA comes from central France and from Burgundy, where the most enlightened people used to be when the Templars were around, who created my country of birth. So I'm now beginning to realize that I'm actually involved in this, and I thought I was just writing a book.
Really?
You know, so
no coincidence.
But what I do know from the Masons is that these people are being protected for their own good. because now is not the right time to bring these people out. It's not politically expedient to bring this out. So they're being protected for their own good. So there are people within the Masonic institution who know who's who. So who knows where this story goes? Or maybe I own a castle in Portugal. I don't even know it. You know,
Right.
I could be
I mean,
rich.
that is one of the, I mean, that's one of the most important reasons I think for talking to you. I mean, I just really enjoy. I think I could listen to you for hours, but I because it's also, you know, can't put a finger on it, but I can feel it when I'm in Portugal, and I also felt very called to go there a few years ago, and yeah, I had no idea of any of this knowledge. And I've been to Jerusalem, and I've been to, you know, the birthplace, so they say. I've been to many of these places in Jerusalem, and everything was by chance, you know. I had
Yeah,
no clue of any of this knowledge. It just kind of came to me. But
I
I
think it's I
believe, and
think
I
it's
can.
worth it.
Hmm?
I think that's actually worth doing. Not having much knowledge of something and just
Right?
following your gut feeling. I
Yeah.
think then you don't have the ability to make things up. Yeah, because sometimes you want something
Exactly.
so much that you start putting in yourself
True.
into the situation, and then that doesn't go anywhere. Sometimes it's better just to go like an idiot, you know, into
No,
something,
really, I really
and
feel
then
that
get the
too.
information from the actual space. And I mean, I do that a lot. Most of my books begin as a feeling at a place, and then I have to back it up with some hard facts to bring the people who are very skeptical into this arena. Otherwise, it'd be easy to do. Anybody can just say, "Oh, I dreamed this up, I channeled it, blah blah blah." Yeah, there's a market for that. I'm not interested in that market. I'm interested in trying to bring more people to understand these
Mm,
experiences so that they have an opportunity to also grow spiritually and find themselves.
yeah. And tell me more
So I'm
about,
glad you're drawn to
yeah.
Portugal. It's a very important place.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's many things I want to talk about, but I think I'll leave it for the end because I might edit it out. It's very like a personal journey, but I feel that sacred places, I've just been drawn to them without understanding they were sacred, and then afterwards I find out. But I'd love also for the listeners, you know, on my podcast, and I know a lot of people are interested in these things. When I sit around, you know, a campfire, I tend to just talk about your podcast and what I found for myself. And people, it's very interesting.
Well, thank
People
you.
just turn really quiet. And usually it's in Portugal that I do it as well. And they turn really quiet. It's like something is ignited within them. It's just something very, very special about talking about, you know, this knowledge. And I would really love for you to go into just a little bit more about sacred sites and why, you know, churches were built upon them, and why is this important at all? Well, like, why, you know, for most people it's just a bunch of stones. It's like you know, a site to visit as a tourist. And for those of us who know, tell us more about the, you know, with respect, because I have enormous respect. I also go here in Norway to a lot of stone circles. People don't care about them at all. You know, there's Viking graves and stone circles, etc. And I go there, but I have enormous respect for them, and I still feel like I'm a toddler. But I'd love to know more about, yeah, your work around that, and why it is important for people to know what you would like to share about, yeah, these sacred sites around the world.
Well, you have to go back to what people were doing thousands of years ago, and when before they built temples. If you look at the Aboriginal people or the Hopi, they didn't build anything. They would just go to a place on the landscape and connect to something much greater than themselves, and that's the clue. Because there are places on the land all around the world. I'm sitting on one of them right now. You can't see it, but I can feel it. It's the only place where I can actually put my desk in my apartment where I can get my work done. So these currents of energy are everywhere. They're like the arteries of the planet. Just like the human body can't survive without the veins and the arteries that flow through which the blood flows, the planet also cannot survive without its energy, which flows invisibly through these currents. So back in the days before we had cell phones and television and distractions, people used to be much more connected to the land. So they could sense that something was not quite right with them. And in order to find out what was going on, they would move to certain spaces on the land where they felt connected, not knowing, or maybe knowing, that that's where the veil between the worlds is a little bit thinner. And there are spots on the planet where the veil is a bit thinner because of the way gravity, electricity, and magnetism combine to create a different frequency, just so that allows you to tap in with the slightly different radio station. It's like you're not quite in the third dimension, you're not quite in the fourth, there's a bit in between, there's a thin veil. And the Hopi call them the spots of the fawn. If you go to these sites in America, you won't find anything there, but you can feel them. There's something unusual about the place. And now we have the technology to go to these sites and actually measure the energy and also map the energy. So we know it's there. It's taken us 12,000 years to develop the technology to actually see this on a computer and say, well, yes, there's a vortex there. There have been, for example, mappings of stone circles in England which show the actual vortex going into a stone circle on a computer printout. So we now have the ability to see with technology what the ancients could do so effortlessly. Any person who's intuitive can do the same thing. Any psychic can do the same thing. They can see the energy. The more you interact with these spaces, the more your body becomes more attuned to them. And 25 years ago, when I was learning this, I thought people were smoking something very strange. Now I can do it. I know where the energy is. I can see it. I know the direction. Sometimes I can even tell you what color it is, because I become so attached to it and I use it so much that for me it's second nature. So whenever I feel that I'm not connected, I go to sit in these places and I feel much more energized. I can't be away from them too long because I feel like my fingers are disconnected from the electrical circuit. I had to put my fingers in the plug and connect and go, whoa. Although, ironically, we can do this by ourselves as well, using techniques like Kriya Yoga or meditation. It's the same process. You're connecting your electromagnetic grid to something much greater. So, and again, the more you do it, like driving a car, the easier it becomes. So what happened was that as we began to go through time and we forgot how to do this, we had to mark these places with stones. So stone circles, dolmens, menhirs, anything to do with stone, specifically stone that has quartz in it. You go to a New Age shop that's full of quartz. The reason why they use quartz is because it comes from this tradition. The quartz remembers everything. It's an electromagnetic or piezoelectric material, and under the right circumstances, it will record and store energy. And that includes the intent of the people that go to these sites. That's why sometimes the stones are dragged from a long, long way away, because it has those properties. So when you put the stone at these specific hotspots, it remembers and records and stores the energy so that the next person that comes along influences that energy field by putting their prayer and their intent into the site. And the more people do it, the more the site becomes sacred over time. So you fast forward, the Egyptians start building their temples on these hotspots. And then the Gothic cathedrals in Europe are built over these spots by the people who knew how to do this. These were the Knights Templar and the Cistercians. The Catholic Church thought that they were just putting up buildings to honor God. Yes, but they didn't tell them which God they were honoring. They're honoring a universal concept, not a Catholic God. It's because that's a very limited idea. So these places, and especially throughout Europe, they're built on top of the ancient sacred sites. So if you go into France, you go to Spain, Portugal. I don't know if it happens anywhere else in Europe, probably Italy. If you look at the foundations of the buildings, there's usually a stone circle or a dolmen under them, or they actually incorporate the actual stones of the old monument within the actual walls of the modern building itself. And so they're taking advantage of what was there before for many thousands of years, the energy of place and the healing property of the space and the prayer of the space. And you can go there to a place called the altar, and you are altered. That's why it's called an altar. It's altering you to a new level of resistance. And that was all kept from the church because they had no idea what the hell they were doing. So it's almost like a bit of a joke that was going on around the world, where a new religion comes in, takes over everything, but they have no idea what they're doing. And yet the buildings that sit on the land have the prayers and the energy that has come from thousands of years before. And this is why we go to these places, to have that effect. And today, again, we can actually monitor people's effects and body patterns and brainwave patterns to show the difference of what happens when you are in a sacred space. And it does show that your brainwaves are accentuated as much as 4,000% above normal waking state when you travel to these places. Yeah, and it was actually the Russian scientists that found this out, because they were way ahead of anybody in terms of that kind of research. So today we have the ability to map this energy, to demonstrate it, and see how it affects people to the point where we know which sites can be used for healing or for altered states of awareness. And the idea was to connect you with a much finer level of being, what you want to call God, if you want to call it that, or the source, or the management, as I call it. Depends what you want to call it. But the idea was to connect with something greater than yourself, so you can be much more aware of yourself within the three-dimensional world. And by bringing information from the other side, from the other world, you can apply that in your daily life and hopefully become a better person, because that's what it's all about. It's about, doing your work here while you're actually awake and not dead to the world. You're not just, you're not just born, you have a difficult life, and then you die. That's what people do when they're not aware of the bigger picture. They're just attached to the material world, and that has its purpose as well. But anyone who wants to do spend their time here wisely, they try to connect with the place where they came from, bring back information, apply it, and they become better people. They become much more aware of why they're here and the process of what they're going through. And that gives you a degree of control of your life and your manifestation process. And that's pretty dangerous if you think about it. So if you can change the shape of the world around you to your will, and there are limits to that, by the way, you can't just do what you want. Imagine what that would do in the hands of people who want to control the world, or want to control people, or want to do very nefarious things. So that's why the information was very well protected. It wasn't because it was secret for the idea of being secret. It was because it was dangerous, used in the wrong hands. It was a protection device. So that's the importance of sacred space in a nutshell. It was really to make you understand that you are a god, rather than waiting for something out there to come by and fix your problems, because that's never going to happen.
Thank you. I just saw a light flashing. I don't know if there's cars outside or something. It was just interesting. There was like a light flashing on top of your head just now. We have it on the recording, but thank you so much. And I also like how you kind of close it into why it's important for us. Anyone can just go about these places, but why would we do that, and why people are drawn to it? And I feel personally that many, most of my friends now are people who work with, these sacred energies, and they also tell me that they feel water, the importance of water is very important, which basically is quartz. I mean, quartz crystals are basically, crystallized water. So I feel it's kind of the same thing, but I feel also that many feel called, and that's also,
and they were able to tap into that and then build temples on these places to mark the location, because people would forget. You see, they stopped thinking and stopped feeling. So it's the same thing in France and in many parts of Ireland and Scotland, where you have big concentrations of ancient sacred sites. You also have massive fault lines and earthquake zones, which doesn't seem logical to build places made of stone in a place where they're going to fall down. But that's the whole point. It's part of the technology, is this friction in the earth, which creates this tension. It's electric tension, which generates an energy which transmits itself to the stones. So Egypt is the same way. All the temples on the Nile Valley are built on one of the most fractured rift zones on the entire planet. Sometimes when there's an earthquake there, the Nile is actually flowing backwards. So taking a huge risk by building these places where they are, but it's part of the natural energy of the land that's in constant state of vibration, which creates that electromagnetic quality which transfers to the stones, and the stones transfers the energy to the people that visit them. So they're making use of the natural law in order to create a sacred space.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, there's so much to uncover. But what would you say in terms of the knowledge that you're working on and on Portugal, and the importance of Portugal and why people, or how people might interact with these places. And, you know, I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking also about where we're at right now in the world, you know, that there is a great awakening happening. There are many people searching. That's one of the first things I find when I go to Portugal and I travel around. People are in search of something, but they're not really quite sure what it is. And I just feel it's good to give people just very easy steps to embark on, you know, your soul journey. And what would you say? I mean, you have so much information, but also experience on, you know, if somebody is searching, maybe it's their mission, their soul purpose, you know, maybe it's that beginning of the thread. What would your advice be of how to, you know, is it seeking out the places? Is it practices from within? Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Drink heavily. That's what I do. Because this is so crazy, nothing makes sense. Actually, it does help. We do a lot of heavy drinking in pubs, and we come up with the greatest ideas, which turn out to be true. No, I think you have to find your own way. You have to find your own path. That's how it's been for me, and that's been for the people that I've read, that I appreciate. And I acknowledge as being people who really are talking the truth, and it really comes from you have to be curious, you have to be willing of letting go of everything that you've learned, and literally walking like a child, not really knowing what you're doing, and being in a state of receptivity where you connect with something greater than yourself. And usually, when you're not looking for something, and when you're not asking for something, it finds you. This is how I've had my experiences in the Great Pyramid, for example, when, you know, in the middle of total darkness, I saw all the people, all the priests coming out of the stones, surrounding me and 3 other people, and they saw it too. We had not expected that. We didn't ask for that. It was the connection between us and the sacred space that created that wonderful event, and it changed my life. And since then, I've done the same technique. I go to these places that I feel subtly drawn to. Like, I'll be sitting here, and I'll be, you know, twitching, itching to go. I like traveling, and I like getting in my car and disappearing. And some days I just get it in my head, I have to go to this specific place. I thought, okay, because there's something in me that's in my subconscious that's saying, this is missing in you right now, or you're searching for something which you are not even aware of. And if we go to the site, the answer will be there, and usually it is. And I usually go to the place and I'll say, so what is this about, and how does it make me a better teacher? Because that's my job. And that's all I ask. And I just walk around, I'll take pictures, I have a sandwich, and suddenly I'm writing, I'm seeing something, or I hear something, and it becomes part of my journey of research, which then becomes a book or a documentary. That's usually how it begins for me. And from that experience, I grow as a person too. So I learn to fall on my face once in a while, make an idiot of myself, you know, dust myself off, get up again, and try to do it better the second time, and not be too hard on myself. That's usually how it works. You're on a journey of discovery. You're here to have an experience, and there's no one else that can tell you how to do it. The best you can do is, you know, read the right books, read the right documentaries, go traveling to these sacred sites, and slowly you start acquiring all of this information. And then after a few years, you realize half this information was complete nonsense. It was coming from someone's head. It wasn't coming from reality. And that's happened to me too. I mean, I used to buy every book that wasn't nailed to a wall. And then I realized after years of doing this that most of the people writing these books have no idea what the hell they're talking about. It's all coming from here, from your ego. And a lot of them are not particularly nice people either. They're all so spiritual, and they're complete frauds. There's a lot of fakery going on in the New Age environment. But be that as it may, I'm sure they're probably trying to do the best they can. After a while, you get a sense that, okay, I've read all of this, and I kind of knew it anyway. I kind of felt like I knew all of this. So you remove all these things, you keep the things that make sense, so they become your toolbox. Okay, and then you apply your experience as the other parts of your tools, and suddenly you have all of these tools at your disposal. So you're borrowing here and there from other people how they've tackled the same problem, and if it makes sense for you, apply it. But then you have to finesse it into your own experience, because otherwise you're following someone else's experience. So my experience is no good to you because I'm following my own trajectory. That's not your trajectory. You've got to find your own path. So if I say something that makes sense to you,
Yeah.
Apply that until it
Yeah.
doesn't work, throw it away, keep what works, and apply what you have learned that makes sense and works. And now you've got you're your own teacher now,
Yeah.
and then you can show the way to somebody else.
Yeah.
I think the Hopi actually said it quite well. They have a very funny phrase that said, we're the ones who have been waiting for. We keep waiting for a teacher, a guru, or an expert to come along. Yeah, they're useful only up to a point, because after that, you have to actually be your own expert. But that comes from experience. So the big advice I always tell people is go to a sacred place. It could be a standing stone. It could be a stone circle. It could be a church on top of an old sacred site. It might even be a coffee shop in downtown Stockholm, which is sitting on an old sacred site, which then became a Viking grave, that then became a coffee shop. Because if it feels right where you're sitting, there's something
I love
important
that.
about that location. Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, I can
Me
walk
too.
downtown Portland, Maine right now and go and sit somewhere, and I know there's something special there.
Yeah.
And because I feel right, I feel connected. And there's those moments when you
Trust.
feel connected
Yeah.
that there's something important about the place. And sometimes in the modern era, people that have bought that building or that coffee shop or that theater, they are connected to the same energy too, and they felt that. That's why they bought that location, and it attracts people who are searching for the same thing. So the trick is to follow yourself in the end,
Yeah.
and learn to fall down once in a while, and don't worry about it. I mean, if we were perfect, we wouldn't have incarnated. Think about it. If you think you're that good, you're not, because you're here. Only people who have completely mastered the art of everything are no longer alive. They're now feeding us the information in the places where we call sacred sites in order to help our journey, just as it once helped them. So that's the relationship. We have a lot of help in the invisible universe that I call the management. So it's always worthwhile listening to the management once in a while and see what comes in. And then it shapes your experience, because no one else can tell you how to do it. Only you can find out in the end.
I love that. Thank you
Because
so
once you
much.
put that sort of magnetism out and you connect to something and your intent is true, it will respond back. I find that a lot. We call it coincidence. Okay. That's just God's way of being invisible. So there's coincidences that you find yourself in suddenly are there to open you up. So that's what I would suggest.
Yeah.
Go to places where you feel drawn to. Read a good book, or let's see. There's a website called megalithic.co.uk where people are actually putting in pins all around the world where they find sacred sites, standing stones, and so forth, and holy wells. That's a useful tool to have.
Yeah.
And in Portugal, they begin to add many more, I've noticed now.
Really?
And I'm sure I'll come across a few, and I'll add a few pins in there.
Well,
It's easily available, it's free.